Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
A super big warm welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for joining us for another fantastic industry edition of the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Our mission, as always, is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature spanning a whole range of genres to book lovers around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I am Darren Kazanko, science fiction and horror author, reader, and one of your hosts and co-founder of Australian Book Lovers, coming to you today from Corner Country.
And I'm Veronica Strachan, fantasy, picture book and memoir writer, reader, and your co-host for today.
And this is not only industry special edition, but it's also episode number 18. So
yes,
we're not a teenager anymore, we're adults.
Oh, yeah. So close. Well, we're legal, aren't we? So
well, legal, yes. Yeah, I still don't feel like an adult, and I'm not 18, that's for sure. But yes, but wow, what a show! What an interview we've got today.
I just love talking to these industry. I love talking to the authors, but then I love talking to the industry professionals who are not always authors themselves, but they are so passionate about supporting Australian writers and getting books out there for our readers. And as always, so much information from the fabulous Kate Cuthbert, who's the Program and Partnership Manager at Writers Vic.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we got so much fantastic information when we spoke with Tas Writers. And then today talking with Kate, just such an insight into all these different programs. And, you know, the energy that we got from Tas Writers was fantastic. And it's just as powerful coming from Kate as well. When you hear all the work she's going through and her team there at Writers Victoria, just the drive that they've got to bring all these fantastic programs and the work that goes into it, and the level to detail is just astounding. And it was, I was so inspired listening to her talk and learning all these wonderful things that the Writers Centre or Writers Victoria is doing.
Yeah, it is really good. And see, you now know why I'm understandably proud to be a member at Writers Vic. And absolutely. Also, we would encourage all of our writers to check out your local Writers Centre and be a part of it, jump in and get involved in the community. Yeah,
absolutely correct. And without taking too much thunder from some of the interview, that does raise an important thing before we go to the interview, and that is to all our listeners out there, whether you're a book lover or a writer or just someone who's interested in the literary world or want to be a part of the literature, should I say, community in Australia. Like Veronica said, join one of your local writer centres. But if you are joined to one of the, for example, South Australian Writer Centre, then you are able to enjoy discounts at any of the programs run by writer centres all across Australia. And that is fantastic. So it's not just a state thing. Obviously, that's a great place to start. And that's a place where you can physically go and meet people and be part of the community. But the whole nation of writer centres is at your fingertips. There's just so much content, so much education, so many fascinating, fantastic things to be a part of, to learn from, to watch, to listen, to be inspired by, to be motivated by. I think, what's anybody waiting for? But
that's just right. You would be hard pressed to attend every event and happening. Really, that would be more than a full-time job. So
I think it'd be impossible. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But look, don't take my word for it. I think maybe we'll jump to the wonderful interview with Kate from the Victoria's Writers Centre, because she will definitely have you itching and ready to become a part of a Writers Centre wherever you are. Not to mention, probably want to join a lot of these programs that are coming up.
Yeah.
So what a fantastic opportunity by joining one of your local writers community, by taking advantage of the discounts that are being offered as part of joining one of the other programs around the state. And there are some fantastic programs coming up with the Writers Victoria this season 2 for 2021, which Kate is going to tell you all about. And I can't wait for our listeners to hear, because it's such a fantastic interview.
Yes, brilliant. Bring it on.
Bring it on. Let's go. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Industry Special Edition and podcast episode 18. And here is the wonderful Kate from Writers Victoria.
And welcome, listeners, to another fabulous industry interview. And we have with us today from Writers Victoria. And yes, there will be some hometown advantage here, I'm sure. But we have Kate Cuthbert. So Kate is the Program and Partnership Manager from Writers Vic. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Very good. And of course, I also have my co-host.
Oh, I wasn't sure if I was. Yes, I always jump in so soon, so I thought I'm going to wait until I absolutely positively know that it's my turn to pop up. Hello, Kate. Thank you so much for joining us on this Australian Book Lovers podcast, and really appreciate the time. And we've got so many questions. This is going to be awesome.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
Very good. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Wurundjeri land, part of the Woiwurrung in the Kulin Nation. And Darren, give us you.
Certainly, I am coming to you from Corner Country, South Australia, a little bit drizzly, but nonetheless a beautiful part of the world on the coast. So I know you've got the hometown advantage today, Veronica, but I've got the beach. That's all I can say.
Oh, yeah. All right. So, Kate, where are you working today?
I'm also working on Wurundjeri land here as part of the Kulin Nations.
Beautiful. Okay.
It's a little drizzly here too, Darren.
Yeah.
I think we've all got a perfect excuse not to do any washing, I think.
Or put it straight in the dryer. All right. Enough of the housekeeping.
Climate change.
Sorry, Darren. Although it's winter here, we've got the fire on. So usually I have the drying racks out there. Enough. Let's talk about Writers Victoria. So, Kate.
Yes, indeed.
Tell us about the history of Writers Victoria. How long has it been going?
Oh, goodness. Hold on just a second. I didn't realize you were going to ask me that. Now I'm going to pull up that information. I have it. All right. I'm good. I knew it was more than 30 years because we had our 30th anniversary at the end of 2019.
Oh, wow.
So Writers Victoria actually used to be known for quite some time as the Victorian Writers Centre. And it was created in 1989. So that makes us 32 this year.
And it's had a little bit of an interesting history of where it's been located.
Yeah, it's kind of bounced around the inner city a little bit, but now we're on the third floor of the Wheeler Centre, along with a lot of other amazing literary organizations here in Melbourne. Yeah,
fantastic. And for those that don't know, the Wheeler Centre, it is in absolute heart, right near the I was going to say the National Library. I like to think we're most important, but no, the Victorian State Library. But you also share with some fabulous other organisations, Melbourne Writers Festival, Emerging Writers Festival, Small Press Network, Express Media, and one that I love, the City of Literature Office, because as I pointed out to Darren the other day, Melbourne is, of course, the designated UNESCO City of Literature.
That's right. We were the second city of literature in the world, behind Edinburgh.
Yay!
Oh, wow. That's awesome. And look, I as yet haven't had the opportunity to visit the Wheeler Centre, but having done this podcast and hearing so much about the ongoings or happenings there, I'm surprised the Wheeler Centre doesn't have its own little airport. I'd book a flight because head straight down there. No, it sounds like an absolutely fantastic place.
Yeah. Like it's a really lovely place to work. We do have a fair few people dropping in just to visit. It's actually not that interesting a building to visit. It's really mostly just offices.
Yeah.
But it has the performance space there on the second floor, just off the lobby, where a lot of the Wheeler Centre programming happens. They do a lot of evening programs during the week. And then there are other spaces around where Writers Victoria runs a lot of our programs, for example, from the Wheeler Centre. Workshop space and boardroom, and there's also a library on the third floor that, as a member of the resident organizations and as a member of Writers Victoria, you're able to go and sit in, and it's a really beautiful, peaceful space there.
It is. It has that kind of, with the older building, I think, is that the dense nature of the stone is the quiet, and the history drops onto your shoulder. Yeah, find the ambience.
It's a good thing and a bad thing because it's a heritage listed building.
Yeah, of course.
It is beautiful and it has that lovely feel to it, but we can't hang things up on the wall or change things. So it gives and it takes away.
Oh, there you go. Let's not mention the bathrooms. We'll just move on.
Well, I'm just curious, Kate, when it comes to the library you mentioned on the third floor, is it something that has a heavy focus on displaying, for example, works of authors that have worked with the Writers Victoria, or is it just mainly Australian authors, or is it a collection that changes much, or who designs the content for the library?
So the library actually belongs to Writers Victoria, and there's a separate library sort of in a similar space for, that belongs to Australian Poetry, which is another one of the resident organizations at the Wheeler Centre. And the Writers Vic library is separated into three separate sections. There's like a fiction section, which we often include books by members shelved there. So if you're a member of Writers Victoria, you can send us in a copy of your book and it will go into our library. We have a section that's absolutely chock full of craft books, so books about writing that writers can access if they're looking for information or guidance or inspiration. And the third thing that we do, which I think is really important, and it's one of my favorite things about the library, is we have a subscription to every literary journal in Australia.
Oh, wow.
And we maintain those subscriptions and we keep them all in the library so that writers who are interested in pitching to literary journals or interested in literary journals at all can come in and access those latest editions rather than having to maintain subscriptions of their own, because there are a lot of literary magazines in Australia and they all have very good editors and they're all doing a lot of really good things, but they can be expensive if you're trying to maintain subscriptions to all of them across the board. So we try and do that for our members, so our members can come and access all of the literary journals in our library.
That's fantastic.
A great, that's a great resource, great service.
So, Kate, just on the literary side, because I'm going to jump all over here with my questions, but I'm sure you'll be fine. In terms of people, or in terms of writers using literary journals to practice their skills or to, get themselves known, what are your suggestions around that? Is that a good thing? Is that a helpful thing? What have you found?
Well, I think it depends very heavily on what kind of writing you're interested in doing and where you, and I suppose where you hope to end up.
Right.
I think I misspoke a little bit earlier when I said that, literary journals are a good place to start, which is true, but it's not the only thing that literary journals are good for. A lot of people think of them as, where you start to build a name for yourself and then you move on to more traditional or commercial publishing. That's not true at all. Our literary journals are places where even really established writers continue to publish, particularly if they want to do a really short deep dive into a topic, or if there's a really timely topic that they want to write to. Putting out books takes a very, very long time. So if you are trying to write to things that are happening in culture at the moment, then literary journals are a really, really good way to do that. I think literary journals have a lot of benefits for writers in a lot of different ways. They're essentially critical thinking. They're just vehicles for critical thinking. So to develop an argument, develop a point of view, to develop a voice, literary journals and writing for literary journals can be a really good way of doing that for young writers. They can help to get your name out there. They're certainly very shareable, whereas books, it's a little bit hard to share on social media outside of the cover. And they can also begin a conversation, I think, in a way that books are a little bit harder, because books require a little bit more of a commitment, whereas engaging with an essay, for example, you're able to do that in a more immediate way.
It's interesting coming from a more clinical sector where academic writing is seen in scientific journals and those kind of things. So they carry their own kudos and a kind of an introduction into your CV. So similar, I guess, for writers. And as you say, people are coming back, completing that circle, still contributing as established writers.
And I think that it should be noted that here in Australia, the vast majority of the journals are all literary journals. So if you're interested in writing into more commercial genres or genre fiction, you're less likely to find literary journals helpful to you in that regard.
Fair enough. No, that's lovely. Now, one thing I did forget to say is to tell us a little bit about yourself. What brought you to Writers Vic and why the passion for the writing industry?
Well, I've been addicted to story my whole life. My training and background is actually in editorial. I worked in publishing for more than a decade before I came across to Writers Victoria. I ran an imprint for Harlequin, which was then bought out by HarperCollins, and eventually the imprint was wound down, as they euphemistically say in the industry. And I was sort of had a choice to make as to what I wanted to do. And I knew that I still wanted to work with writers, but I was really interested in working with writers at different stages of the writing process.
Mm.
I've always been interested in education and creative development, and I've always been a huge craft nerd. So when the programming role at Writers Vic came up, it felt like a perfect fit for
Yes.
the things that I already knew how to do, and the things that I wanted to learn how to do, and the things that I was passionate about.
Perfect. Like the perfect storm. Excellent.
Yeah, it worked out really nicely.
Yeah, dream job. Congratulations.
So, Kate, obviously, as the program and partnerships manager, you've had a tremendous amount to do with putting the programs together. And, you know, one thing that I often think, having been to a number of workshops there, is that Writers Victoria offer a vast range of workshops, from emerging to established, craft, all sorts of different things. So how do you get a program that diverse and put it together? Where do you begin?
Oh, that's a really big question. Look, I want to be very clear that I don't do it by myself. Yeah, we have a really strong team at Writers Vic, and a lot of the work that we do, particularly around the program, is quite collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
We also regularly invite expressions of interest in from potential tutors as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So everyone who might be interested in teaching for us is welcome to send me an email, and then those sort of get shuffled away until programming time, which happens twice a year. We ask our members a lot.
Right, yeah.
We're almost constantly asking them what they would find useful. And I also collect the anecdotal evidence as well, conversations from people, things that happen on Twitter or on our socials. So we're always looking at what people say that they want,
Mm-hmm.
and then marrying it along with what writers generally need,
Mm-hmm.
as well as keeping an eye on what's happening culturally in the zeitgeist that might be of interest as well. So, and those are sort of the three separate areas of the program.
Such a good approach. Definitely.
Thank you. When we talk about the things that writers need, those are very much the standard craft-based workshops. So things on character, for example, things on place, things on structure, things on editing. Those are workshops that are perennially popular because they're perennially useful.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll always see that sort of workshop as part of our programs. Things that people want, we often look at deeper dives into different fiction areas and nonfiction areas. So, for example, historical fiction is something that we got asked a lot about because we didn't run one last season. So we ran one this season with Solari Gentile. So we're really excited about that one. We're running How to Write Coming of Age with Kate Mildenhall because we had a few people talk about how to manage that. Mm-hmm. We have Victoria Perman talking about navigating dual timelines, which is something that is increasingly common and popular in commercial women's fiction and genre fiction, is how to navigate and marry together, something that happened in the past with something that's happening in the present, and how to manage the timelines in a novel when you're working with dual timelines. So those were all things that had come up as just some conversations, or I saw a tweet somewhere that somebody said, I wish that this was happening.
Do you feel like a fairy godmother then? I was like, your wish is my program.
I mean, I wish I could. One of the things that is incredibly frustrating, and this is true for all programming, I think, is that oftentimes I'll read something that says, somebody will say, I wish this has happened, and I'll read that as a genuine wish.
Yes.
And then it turns out actually it's not actually a wish. Okay. So I'll program something and nobody will book in, and then it's heartbreaking. But when we're talking about those cultural zeitgeisty things, I ran a really successful workshop on newsletters last season that went really, really well. We're running one on just ran one last weekend on visual essays with Eloise Grills. That was really good. We have writing for video games. So we're also looking at different aspects of what's going on. And in the new season, we're running a beginner's guide to playwriting and a screenwriting boot camp, because a lot of writers are looking at adapting their own work or exploring some of the opportunities that are available in playwriting and in screenwriting. And because the lack of support that this government has shown for the arts industry here in Australia has really dramatically hit the screenwriters and the playwrights, we also wanted to try and support some of those writers as well at the same time. So
Oh, good on you. And I think, for listeners to this podcast that aren't familiar with Writers Victoria or, writing centres in general, even though that was somewhat of a brief description, but even in that brief description, the spectrum of writing genres, I suppose, as far as, like you said, writing for video games or newsletters. So it's not just, if you want to write a book, become part of a writer centre. It's anything really, words on paper or words on the digital screen, whatever format or medium. It sounds like, you're working hard to make sure that whatever is needed at that time, like I said, as far as taking the temperature of the social realms, you sort of can pull out these amazing programs where people can learn more skills when it comes to all these different areas and facets of writing, not just the novel.
I mean, we get really excited about writing of all kinds. So
Yes.
it's mostly just, it's mostly a lot of the time, it's sort of what we wish we want to see in the world as well. And this is true of the other writer centers around Australia. All of the programming teams do really great work trying to provide opportunities for writers here in Australia.
In regards to something you mentioned just previously there, Kate, in relation to the support or lack thereof from the government, I'm just wondering, from your professional standpoint, do you foresee or do you sense that there may be an improvement in the relationship between the government and the arts here in Australia moving forward, now that it's kind of really come to a forefront through the pandemic, but it's something that's probably been around for a while, but maybe not become so prominent as far as a topic of conversation? Now that it has, do you think that's going to shift the view and possibly see a little bit more support moving forward? Be honest.
Yeah.
Look, I think the problem, and I mean, I'm speaking very strictly about the federal government, because the Victorian government has done a lot to try and support the arts, particularly during 2020 when so many artists were absolutely slammed by the loss of work. But I think the problem with the arts and culture sector is very similar to the problem with the higher education sector, which is another sector that we've seen just be completely left behind, is that arts and culture are about critical engagement. And I don't think that this government particularly likes a populace that is actively encouraged to critically engage. And
I think that's such a beautiful observation.
They certainly don't seem robust enough to be able to manage any level of creative engagement. And one of the things that, just on a personal level, irritated the pants off me with all of the discussion around the budget, particularly this idea of being a woman's budget, is that if they really wanted to support women, then they would fully fund the arts and culture sector, because so much of the arts and culture sector is run by women. Yeah. And it would be keeping women in the workplace, and it would be providing that kind of economic and professional stability. But that's not a discussion that anybody's willing to have.
No, definitely not. So let's think about what Writers Vic does. In fact, for a lot of the less represented groups, a lot of minority groups. So let's look at Indigenous writers and culturally and linguistically diverse. So tell us how Writers Vic supports those kind of marginalised groups.
As with most of the art sector, we could be doing a lot more in this space. One of the things that we do try and do is provide employment opportunities. So we look for ways to make sure that the workshops that we are providing are being given by as wide a population as possible, so that the information that's being provided is being provided from a number of different points of view. And I think this is why, you can see a character workshop every season, but every character workshop is going to be different because every writer writes differently. And one of the hallmarks of my role as a programmer is to try and diversify the voices that we're hearing from, because there is no writer that can't teach something to somebody. Every writer brings something to the table that is unique to their writing process. And just as in education in schools, not every student is going to engage with every teacher. I think that's true in writing workshops as well. Not every writer is going to engage with every writing tutor. And it's really useful to have a number of voices so that you can find the writer from whom you're going to be able to learn best. And that's really important to me.
Mm.
On a more specific level, we do offer ongoing commissions from particularly women writers of color. And we have we also facilitate the Deborah Cass Prize, which is a prize that is specifically for migrant writers as well. So
brilliant.
yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the Writability program.
Yeah, so the Writability program is our flagship program. It's really special and unique to Writers Victoria. So it's specifically for writers with disability, and it provides creative and professional development and support for writers with disability working towards projects. So every year we have 5 fellowships, and those fellowships include ongoing mentorship, ongoing support, ongoing professional and creative development through workshops, and just a year-long focus, I suppose, on creative development for a writer with disability. And we have a few other programs under the Writability banner as well. Last year, for example, we ran Publishability, which is an extension to the Writability program, where we worked with writers whose works were right on the cusp of being ready to be published. And we also provided training for publishers and people in the publishing industry about working with writers with disability and talking about the social model of disability and sharing the ways that they can best support their writers with disability and make it so that publishing is a much more accessible way of, much more accessible for all writers.
Yeah.
And that was really successful. All of the publishability training sold out, and we have one of our publishability fellows, Heidi Everett, has just been picked up as one of Ultimo's launch books.
Ah, fantastic.
So we're really excited about that. I'm really excited for Heidi as well.
It's really good. And having just, not long read Growing Up Disabled in Australia and understanding the difference in the social model of disability, it's fantastic to see it in action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have a package that we also put out with local, it's called Writability Goes Local, where we work with different councils to create local writing groups for writers with disability as well, so that they just have that ongoing support and creative outlet as well. As well as, I think in many ways, in a lot of situations, the absolute best thing that you can do for a writer is to say your work is valid, what you're doing is valid, it's not a waste of time, and that your voice deserves to be heard.
Might I say, in the most Australian way, I guess, you don't muck around, do you? It sounds like when you try to achieve a certain program or something, the whole facet's done. Like, to go right through the whole spectrum to the point where you're teaching, or at least offering to educate somewhat the publishers themselves on how to deal. That's amazing.
Well, a lot of the barriers to entry, and as someone who worked in publishing for a really long time, I feel like I can speak with a little bit of authority about this. The problem isn't with the writers, the problem is with the structure. And addressing the structural inequities is really where we're going to see sustainable change.
And so could you maybe give me or our listeners a brief idea of, when you say the structural inequalities, how does that represent in the real world? For say, someone like me who doesn't have a great understanding of the publishing side.
If you think about publishing and publishing houses, so publishing houses the vast majority of them are run by white middle-class women until you get to the upper part, and I'm speaking in gross generalizations here, but the vast majority of the publishing houses are run by white middle-class women until you get to sort of the executive level, in which case they become run by white upper-class men. And the problem with that is that it doesn't matter how good intentioned the decision makers in that situation are, they're still coming from a place where non-white, non-middle-class writers are othered, and creating a safe space to be able to tell stories, which is such a vulnerable thing to do, is really, really hard, because you're working against everything that you've been taught growing up, and you're working against the experience of everybody around you as well. So when we're talking about broad structural changes. What we really need to start to see is an enormous amount of diversity in the actual publishing houses at the levels where people make decisions. And that's really hard because publishing isn't set up to be a successful career option.
Mhm.
It's very much set up as a place where you are lucky to work there and you're lucky to do what you love. And as a result, to get into publishing, you have to have a master's degree, which is an artificial barrier to entry, really. The vast majority of what you're going to learn about publishing, you will learn on the job. And having some education can be really useful, and it can certainly make things less opaque, but it's really not necessary to have a master's degree to get into publishing. But what it does is it means that people who can't afford graduate education for whatever reason are suddenly cut out. A lot of publishing internships are unpaid, which means that they go to people who have the support around them to enable to work for free for long enough to then get that experience that will then get them in the door of the publishing houses. Publishing pay rates are shockingly low, particularly going that you have to have a graduate degree to get into them. So you're looking at somebody who can afford to work for several years, sort of at less than $45,000 a year, which can be very, very hard, particularly if you have other responsibilities around you, a family or parents or anything like that. So it's really not set up to be an inclusive industry. And so until publishing really addresses all of those inequities, we're going to continue to have this discussion about why we're not seeing more diversity on our bookshelves, why we're not seeing more inclusivity in our libraries, that sort of thing.
Do you think because obviously you keep a pretty strong finger on the pulse of what's happening out there, do you think that inequality, or the publishers basically maintaining a mainstream view on what's what and everything else is maybe from on the outside, but do you think the rise of independent publishers, self-publishing, the sales do you think there's the sales in Australia of alternative books? When I say alternative, for the moment, those books that mainstream publishing may always try to avoid or just for some reason not include, has there been enough sales to start to turn that boat around? Or is it a case that the existing big publishers, they might be fighting a losing battle in the sense of they've got space on the bookshelf, but they're losing the battle beyond that, in a changing medium where we've got digital and pop-up shops and independent retailers and independent publishing?
I think it depends heavily on what you're writing. Certainly in genre world, which is a world that my personal inclination is to inhabit, independent publishing has completely altered the face of commercial publishing.
Oh, really?
And so one of my areas of expertise is in romance publishing, which is the biggest bookseller in the world. And when commercial publishers weren't interested in picking up romances by writers of color and or even romances that featured characters of color, those writers turned to independent publishing and have absolutely built incredible careers. And there are some incredible writers that have come out in the last 7 or 8 years that have proven that actually the publishers were completely on the wrong side of history in this regard. And I think that in many ways, some of those authors have gone on to have relationships with commercial publishers, but a lot of them haven't. And I think in many ways, what independent publishing taught them is that they don't actually need the commercial publishers to find their audience. Now, that is a very specific example because romance readers are incredibly digitally literate. And in Australia in particular, romance readers have been taught that they can't find the books that they love to read in Australia anyway, because Australian booksellers don't stock them.
Oh, really?
No. The Australian bookselling industry is not set up to support romance readers.
That's strange. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's so strange because you just mentioned that it's the biggest selling genre. So it makes no sense. I'm thinking, hang on a second.
I don't know how how deeply you want to dive into this subject.
Oh no, I'm just a little bit shocked, Kate.
No,
Although
no.
no, on the same time,
But
no, that
it's
would probably
really
in an
about-
upside down world that makes total
Yeah.
sense.
No. If you'll see some in the discount department stores like Big W in like the specific Harlequin section.
Yeah.
But realistically, no, you don't see romance books on the bookshelf. And I mean, part of that is they weren't locally acquired for a very, very long time. It's only been about 15 years they started being locally acquired. But secondly, Australia booksellers don't stock mass market paperbacks.
Mm.
And mass market paperbacks are what your genre fiction is published into, because your genre fiction readers read a lot, like a lot. We're talking about 2 or 3 books a week at a minimum.
Yep.
And
Guilty.
so, yeah, exactly. So when you want,
Yeah,
so
you
when
go,
you want
book lovers.
so when you're reading that much, you don't necessarily want to pay the $32.99 for a book, right? You want that
yes.
quick, that that cheap and cheerful size, which Australia doesn't publish. So it means that realistically, I say romance because that's the genre that I know best, but it's
Mhm.
also true of our science fiction and fantasy writers.
Mhm.
Crime, not so much, because crime can bleed into literary fiction in a way that the other genres can't. But we also never see horror on the shelves either. And those are really the genres that thrive in a mass market world. And they're also, incidentally, the genres that have thrived in a digital world as well.
Mhm.
So, yeah. I don't actually remember what your original question was.
Oh,
We're
no,
talking-
so I think you have kind of answered
Yeah.
it, and that is that,
Yeah.
with the sales of books, now that
Yeah,
independent publishers
hybrid and
can
indie.
put some
Yeah,
of these
sorry,
fast
yeah.
titles, is
Yeah.
the actual demographics or the data of the sales now swaying that changing that
Not
boat
so much
of,
in no, not so much in
you know.
literary fiction, not so much in creative nonfiction. No, those audiences are still very much about a bookshop, like a bookshelf browsing audience, as opposed to knowing what they look for before they go into a bookshop. So that's been harder, although certainly we've seen again, just to circle right around back to our literary mags, we've seen a lot of literary mags start to pick up those voices that have otherwise been let down and start to publish them in shorter format, which has led to that growing visibility, which will eventually make a difference, I suppose, on
so the inroads are there. It's just a matter of time. Yeah.
Well, it's a matter of time and a matter of publishing admitting it and actually doing something
Doing
about
something
it.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And tricky with the big four, as they are now. Just
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Chatting to my sister-in-law and saying what she likes, I'm going to do a little plug for us here, what she likes about going onto our website and also to listening to some of the author interviews that we do is she said they're different. While we do interview some traditionally published and some who are in the top 10, etc., there are also voices that will not get a Guernsey there because, those same authors will get shopped around to all of the podcasts and all of the shows and all of those kind of things. And she said it's lovely to actually hear some different voices. So we feel
if you're interested in sort of some of the problems with Australian publishing, there is an interview in Liminal magazine with Radia Chowdhury, who is actually a commissioning editor at Penguin Random House here in Australia. And she just gives it's the most frank, straightforward, honest interview that I've ever seen about the industry. And she's brilliant. And I really recommend anybody who's at all interested in this to go and read it immediately. She's just
definitely
such a brilliant thinker. And she's
that was
so
in
generous.
the
Liminal, Liminal, Liminal.
Liminal, my apologies.
Yeah, and her name is Radia Chowdhury, and she's just such an incisive thinker, and the interview is fantastic.
Good. Let's leave it there and go back to Writers Victoria then. So you start your writers young. So you've got some school programs or some programs for kids who are still in primary school. Tell us about those.
Yeah, that's one of our partnerships. We partner with an organization called Gateways, which provides extension programming for talented and gifted children, although it's not limited to children who've been identified as gifted. It's very much about children who have a very strong interest in a specific area, and they run them throughout the whole curriculum. So you can get science and math and art, and I think you can even get PE, but of course, Writers Victoria being Writers Victoria, we're very interested in the writing ones. So yes, we partner with Gateways to run several sessions a year looking at different aspects of writing, but really focused for mostly grade 5s and 6s, although we just started programming for grades 3 and 4 as well.
Grades 3 and 4, wow. I mean, I know that grade 5 was probably when, I was already loving books, but that's when I started writing my own stories and stuff like that. So I think that's a good age. But when it comes to identifying those children that are talented / gifted, my guess would be anyone out there, any kid who starts writing, they're gifted. Because something wonderful. They're the winners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or reading as well. But that sounds, it's such a cool age group. But grades 3 and 4 is what sort of participation from that age level when it comes to writing? Are they really eager little beavers? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So the programming that we're running this year for our grades 3 and 4 is called Science Your Stories. And it's run by a writer named Ilsa Wilde, who just keys them up with amazing science facts and lets them go. And they always have a great time.
Darren,
well, I learned an interesting science fact looking on your program.
On the program?
I didn't know I didn't realize grasshoppers have eyes on their tummies.
Yeah. Oh, that's the Leah Kaminsky workshop. She's great. Yeah.
I'm a little bit scared of grasshoppers now.
Says the horror writer. That'll come out in a book, don't you worry about that.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, well, you mentioned screenplays and TV and those kind of things as well. But there's also, you've got craft workshops for poetry, for short stories. Tell us a little bit about those kind of not book workshops.
Yeah, so we have a lot of poetry on our program this season, which I'm really excited about. We run online feedback clinics. So these run over several months, and it's like a little targeted writing group. We put you all together in one little group, and everybody uploads some work that they do every month, and then there's a tutor that's assigned to every clinic, so somebody who's quite experienced in that area who provides feedback. But everybody's also encouraged to provide feedback on each other's work as well. And our poetry clinic is being run by Andy Jackson, who is a beautiful poet. So we're really excited and very, very delighted to have him working with us. And we're also running a emerging short story clinic with Julie Coe. And this is the first time that Julie has run this for us. So we're very honored to have her on our program as well. And we also decided to run a crime clinic this season with Jock Sarong. So you can get Jock to provide you some feedback for your work. Or if you're more interested in writing for young people, we also have YA with Lily Wilkinson and children's writing with Jane Godwin. So lots of different opportunities to get some feedback on your work and across a lot of different areas.
Fantastic. Now you also do manuscript assessments.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about those.
So we sort of run two different programs in that area. So a manuscript assessment, our manuscript assessments run quite closely to what it would be a structural or substantive edit that you would get at a publishing house. So it looks at the overall structure and the style of your manuscript, looking at content like your plot, your character, your pacing, your voice, narrative, that sort of thing, as well as offering some thoughts on the market and publishing possibilities as well. So these are quite high level assessments. They're not, the assessors aren't going to go in and do some copy editing or proofreading for you. They're really going to be looking at the overall structure of your piece and providing you with an assessment on it. So if you book into a manuscript assessment, we'll assign you to an assessor, normally one who has some experience in your area, and then they will read your work and then provide you with what's called an assessment letter. So it'll be a letter from your assessor to you about the different aspects of your manuscript and areas that are working really well, and maybe areas that need to be looked at a little bit more. But we also offer mentorships. So assessments are really, if you have a piece of work that you've done as much work as you possibly can on it, and you really just start to need a little bit of help because you've looked at it too often. Mentorships are more of an ongoing relationship where you can still get assessments on your work, but it's a conversation rather than an edit. So you can actually work with your mentor as you're writing as well. So have this ongoing discussions with your mentor about ideas of how you'd like your story to go, or places where you're struggling, to have sort of an ongoing relationship, an ongoing coach beside you to help you with the writing as you continue through your work.
A lot of support, a lot of fantastic
A lot of support. Yeah.
So Darren, you had a question about beginning. Do you want to pose that one?
Yeah, well, first I did want to just ask Kate. I also noticed that the writers or members have the ability to rent a jail cell. Is that right?
Oh,
yeah, that's right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned crime, and I thought,
Yeah.
what better way to knock out a good crime novel or
Yeah.
a Pulp Fiction than rent a cell in the old Melbourne jail? But look, in my head, I'm thinking, have they just converted all the cells with a desk and a lamp? But I'm sure it's something a little bit different than that. But how does that work, and how did that come about?
So I'm
very interested.
This is another partnership that we're really delighted to maintain with National Trust Victoria. And so we actually run two different writer studios. We do run the Cells for Writers program, which is in the Melbourne jail, and there are the cells have been converted into writing studios, so they do have a desk and a chair. And
I was close then.
Yeah. The feedback is that from writers who write there, they actually quite like it because it's quite austere. There's not a lot of distractions, and it is like the Melbourne jail is quite atmospheric. So
yes.
It's a great place to be inspired, particularly if you're writing history or crime. But if you prefer more peaceful surrounds, we do also have the Glenfern Writers Studios, which is out in St. Kilda East in this beautiful old mansion with lovely grounds. So yeah, depending on the style of writing that you're doing and what you're writing about, you might want to lean towards one or the other.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of jail cell, laptop, and a slow burning candle. That could be interesting. Midnight. Come up with some good ideas. No, but one question I did want to ask, or just perhaps maybe ask you to offer a bit of an insight into the experience for listeners out there, and for book lovers or writers or anyone interested in learning about the art of writing that may not be aware of what writer centres do, or in this instance what Writers Victoria do. Obviously so many fantastic programs and and so many resources, but for example, if someone decides one day, I want to become a part of a writing centre or a writing association or a writing community, whichever way we want to phrase it, they go online, perhaps they purchase a membership or arrange to become a member. What would their next step be? Because sure, yes, they can grab some programs and stuff, but can they just walk into the Wheeler Centre and maybe bump into other writers that might be having flicked through the journals? Or how does it work? So if someone has no idea, what does it mean once you become a member? Could you walk us through what options someone who's brand new has, as far as getting their feet wet, developing relationships within the writers that are part of Writers Victoria, and what sort of resources there are outside of the programs themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think becoming a Writers Victoria member does come with a number of things, including we run free workshops for members, for example, and you get a subscription to the Victorian Writer, which is our literary magazine, as well as access to other member benefits. But I think this is true across the board of all communities. What you'll get out of it what you put into it. Being a writer is by its nature quite a solitary endeavor, and in my experience, most writers are introverts. But there are ways to sort of start meeting other writers, and I think that there's so much benefit to having people in your life who understand what you're doing, or understand what you're trying to do, and understand what the challenges that you face are on a visceral level, as opposed to just generally being supportive. So If you were to become a new member, welcome. We're delighted to have you. But there are different ways to access the community. So come along to one of our free workshops. We also run a couple of what we call them live write sessions a week. So we run one on Tuesday evening and one on Friday at noon. And they're essentially just accountability sessions. But you can log into Zoom from wherever you are. You're going to meet other writers. Everybody writes together for 25 minutes. And then there's the opportunity to discuss what you're working on and just talk to other writers afterwards. And we run that on Tuesday evenings and Friday at noon, so Friday lunchtime. We have our first Friday Write Club, which we run out of the library, which we haven't been able to run this year yet because of COVID restrictions, but we're really hoping that we'll be able to do it in the latter half of this year, where every Friday we run, the first Friday of every month. Don't show up every Friday because it was not going to happen every Friday.
Oh.
The first Friday of every month.
Well, I reckon you'd be able to book it out every Friday.
We do a tiny little bit of creative development. So we'll do a very, very short sort of overview of one aspect of craft, and then we'll run a Pomodoro section. So if you're not familiar with the Pomodoro method, it's 20 minutes of writing and then a 5-minute break, then 20 minutes of writing, then a 5-minute break, then 20 minutes of writing, and then a 20-minute break. So
okay,
that's great. We keep time for you. We have everything, and then you basically just have to sit down and write. And even though you're all writing your own work, there is something very warm about sitting in a room with other people who are also writing at the same time. And there is a lot of support to be found with other people who understand the process as well. So, and then there are other ways that you can get involved. You can follow us on our social medias. Every April we run a flash fiction competition.
Oh yes, that was fantastic to watch on Twitter. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And people weren't only just responding to us, they were responding to each other as well. So there were definitely conversations that were springing up around the different entries to that competition. You can submit to our magazine. You can come along to some of the free workshops. We're running very shortly, I think this podcast is coming out in June, and we're running a social event on Thursday, the 10th of June at 7 p.m. It's our annual Starry One Star Night. We hold it in a pub in Northcote in Victoria called Book Mulligan's. And essentially what it is we have a microphone and people get up and read the 1-star reviews that have been left on their book. And then they scrunch it up and ceremoniously burn it in Book Mulligan's big fire. So there are ways to, it is.
It's got to be a YouTube live channel or a TikTok.
It's always a lovely evening. It is cathartic. It takes some of the sting out of it. And there are ways to get involved and to find your community and to be involved in the Writers Center. So I hope you find your way to us.
That's good.
Yeah,
and
wonderful.
volunteers, you have volunteers. What do they do?
We do. We do. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to use them very much.
Been tough this year.
Yeah, well, because of the COVID restrictions on the building, because it's an older building and we aren't able to necessarily make as many changes as we would like to make sure that we're keeping everybody as safe as possible. But volunteering, yes. So the main volunteer roles within the organization is through our workshop program, where volunteers can sign up to introduce the workshop tutor and to fetch water, make sure the tech is working, but then get to attend the workshop program for free. So
yep.
Yeah, so it's a good opportunity to get access to some of our workshops, to potentially a lot of our workshops without having to pay the workshop fee price. And it also helps us out a great deal. So we're really, really grateful to our volunteers. But we also have a volunteer librarian, for example, who helps take up the library. We have volunteers who do the proofreading on the magazine. There are a few ways to get involved as a volunteer.
So one more thing I would love to ask you is about the advocacy. So as well as, space, as well as programs, you also do some advocacy for writers. Tell us a little bit about that.
So as the biggest employer of writers in Australia, we do a lot of advocacy. Well, we do a lot of advocacy for writers and for paying the writers, for example. We never ask anybody to work for free. Our writability program is certainly part of our advocacy. we're also quite involved in the creative state here in Victoria as well. So working with other organizations to advocate on behalf of the arts sector and also on behalf of our community and our writers as well, particularly within the art sector where literature is often overlooked as one of the key strands of the art landscape.
Yes. Why is that?
Look, I think this is me theorizing. I don't actually have any real data to back this up. I think there's a couple of reasons. The first, because literature is so solitary, it's not terribly performative, and that makes it hard to engage with, or hard to imagine how to engage with. Mm-hmm. And secondly, because there's a very strong commercial element to the literary sector in terms of there's booksellers and you can go and buy books, and there's this idea that because writers can sell their books, they fall more into commercial than they do into pure art, which
right. Yeah.
Which goes for $100 million. So of course that's not commercial at all, is it?
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly.
So Kate, tell me, I know you're not allowed to say which baby is your favorite, but which program is your favorite?
Look, I don't have I honestly don't have a favorite, okay. But I am incredibly excited about a new program that we started up this year that has been wildly successful. So it's absolutely going to continue.
Yep.
We started up something called the Established Author Forum,
right?
Which came from very, very valid criticism that for writer centers, once writers reach a certain level of their career, there's not a lot for them anymore at the writer center. Writer centers tend to be very much focused on aspiring and early writers and support through that stage of the career, and not so much for writers as they continue a successful writing career. So we started up the Established Author Forum, which really is designed to provide that sense of community again, and that support in terms of creating opportunities for writers to learn and talk to each other. So the Established Author Forum has a creative development portion where we invite a very successful, very highly esteemed writer to come and talk about an aspect of writing that will be of interest to all writers. And then there's a social aspect as well. So after that, we all meet in the Wheeler Center, and then we all go downstairs to the Moat, which for those of you who don't know is a restaurant and bar underneath the Wheeler Center. So there's both creative development and also community development. And it's just been really, really successful. We've had Christoph Stilkes come and talk about structure. We have Kate Kennedy coming to talk about subtext. And then for our September session, we have Michelle de Kretzer, who's going to Zoom in from her place in New South Wales and run an Ask Me Anything session to share her wisdom about her career. And I'm really, really excited about that. I think that's going to be such a special evening. So,
brilliant.
Yeah. So it's not my favorite, but it's also kind of my favorite.
Very good. Darren.
Kate, I know you're super busy, but can I squeeze just two quick questions in? One somewhat serious and one not serious at all. Well, serious, but fun way.
All right, go on.
Yeah. So I was very intrigued to see one of the programs that is coming up in, I believe, mid-July, is predatory publishing versus supported independent publishing. Now, I know that's a very complicated issue and could probably have its own podcast for our length on its own, but for our listeners out there, I'm figuring right now there's probably no better person than yourself to maybe just not so much go into the verses, but maybe just explain really from a professional standpoint, what is the basic definition or description of predatory publishing, so that any writers out there that may not be familiar with the term or aren't quite sure what distinguishes someone as possibly being a predatory publishing offer that they may be receiving. From a professional like yourself, what would you say is the simplest way to be able to identify and thus make an informed decision whether to maybe just bypass a particular company's offer or something along those lines?
Yeah, look, this is one of our free for members sessions. And the reason that I'm running it is because one of the most heartbreaking phone calls that we get, and we do get them, is from somebody who calls and says, look, I've paid my publisher thousands of dollars and they haven't published my book yet. What can I do? And from again, in terms of gross generalizations, if you have to pay your publisher any money, then that's a red flag. So this isn't
definitely
true. I mean, there are nuances to that, and there are situations where you might be entering into a co-pay agreement or that sort of thing, or there's it's supported independent publishers. So there are organizations out there that if you want to publish independently, you could pay money to help you with that. But generally speaking, if your publisher is asking you for money, then take a step back for a second and try and figure out what you're actually getting for your money, because publishers shouldn't be asking you for money to publish your book.
No, and I would think that, like as you mentioned just then, there's nuances involved, and I guess there is a difference when if it's, for example, a small independent publisher that will help you publish your book, but then, you know, for whatever fee that you agree upon, that comes with things like editing, feedback, all those things that you interact with, as opposed to someone saying, we love your manuscript, we'll publish it for X, Y, Z, and all you really get is probably, who knows nowadays, an email or a file with your book cleaned up a little bit, which probably just got run through some random software, as opposed to working with you and, you know, giving you tools, forming a relationship, I guess. But such a scary thought, isn't it? And at some point we're all going to come across them.
And I mean, they're very, very good at what they do, and I think the publishing industry in general is quite opaque, so it can be hard to figure out what is what is an organization like Ingram Spark, for example, which is 100% on board, above board, who will help you independently publish your book, versus another publisher which is just going to take your money and then provide you with very, very little in return.
And never email you again. We've got a couple of our authors who we're trying to help them, you know, find a way to get their files and things from the same kind of predatory publishers. I haven't heard them described like that, but so I will be at that free session if I possibly can.
Yeah, definitely. I think you should, Veronica, and then we can give it that's the news for one of the episodes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, I mean, I received a call from an office in New York, and I remember it was a Saturday, and I was actually working on the computer here, and it was a lady running through how they had grabbed my book, and I think I was telling Veronica, but I just let the call drag on for well over an hour, and just yep, and they were talking about turning one of my books into a screenplay. Obviously hadn't read it because they never mentioned anything specific about anything about the book, except the title. And at the end of it, she's like, so do you think that sounds like a really good thing? I said, yeah, I'm very interested, from a business perspective. Of course, I'm not going to make a decision right now, but really interested in you sending through the details. Can you tell me what the final sort of contract price might be at the stage? And I think, if I remember correctly, it was about $16,000 or $18,000.
Oh,
I'm thinking, hang on, you can pick up final draft for about $100 online now, and turn your book into a screenplay yourself.
Yeah.
But of course, they'll tell you that, especially now with Netflix and all the streaming services, a lot of people, I think you're going to see a new form of predatory publishing where I think there's going to be a lot of industry sharks out there saying that they have connections to hungry production companies looking for new content. And it's like, that's not quite how it works. Having played a little role in the film industry, but I'm sure it's who you know in those things, not someone who, well, maybe there's success rate, but nonetheless, yes, predatory publishing is very important. And I think something is probably changing its skin too, like any good snake. So I have to keep up to it. But the other question I wanted to ask you, Kate, when it comes to writing, what about yourself? Do you must love doing some writing, and where, if you do, and when you do, what do you like to write, or are you more just a reader and a lover of the art form?
Look, I think all editors to a certain degree have to be good writers, but every writer that I know and have ever worked with has a drive to write. Like if they don't write for a little while, they get a bit itchy and funny. I don't have that drive. I feel that way if I haven't read for a long time. But I am in the middle. I'm almost, maybe fingers crossed, close to submitting a PhD. So that's what I've been writing for the last few years.
Oh, wow.
That's
writing.
enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
are you able to share your topic with us?
Yeah, I'm looking at the constructions of Australia through paratextuality on Australian popular fiction, which is a really fancy way of saying I'm looking at the huge influx of Australian popular fiction set in Australia, particularly Australian rural romance and Australian rural crime.
Fantastic.
And looking at how they're creating an idea and vision of Australia through the use of their covers and their titles and their blurbs.
Yeah, this is very true, very true. Well, and if you're, of course, looking for more of those, you can find them on Australian Book Lovers.
Yes, we're starting to get a few. But do you think that's been? Do you think there's a movement? Obviously, it seems to be something rising in the sense you're basing a PhD on it. But do you think there's the movement's growing faster as far as getting that Australian sort of avatar across the literate world? Do you think that's booming because of
no?
the
Like
pandemic?
I think it's on its way back down, to be honest.
Really?
I really do, particularly for Australian rural romance, which I think really sort of had its height maybe through 2012 through 2016. And Australian crime has sort of been just slightly after that.
Still the most stolen book genre from the bookshop.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But we're seeing a lot of the writers who sort of got their start in that starting to transition to other areas. So they're moving into women's fiction or historical fiction, or even the new, everyone calls it rom-com, but it's really just the new iteration of chick lit, but chick lit's still quite a derogatory term in publishing, so nobody uses it. But we're starting to see the rural romance writers move out of rural romance, and we're starting to see some of the crime writers too move away from rural crime and back into the city. So I wonder, I don't know. The answer to that is I don't know, actually. I have no idea. But I mean, we certainly have seen a peak, and it is starting to morph a little bit. So I'd be interested in seeing what it morphs into next.
Right. Well, when you get your PhD done, sorry, Darren, when you get your PhD done and you're ready to release your book or some essays, please give us a call. We'll be happy to
Yeah, no, but I was just happy to hear that even if the peak's coming down, but it's not because the writers stopped writing, they're branching out to different areas.
Yeah.
That's always a good thing.
All right.
Kate, thank you so much for. There's still a million questions I want to ask, but
we have to let to get back.
You have to hit me with a shovel sometimes. Otherwise.
I was just going to say, where can people find Writers Victoria online?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are online on both Instagram and Twitter. And I'm just looking it up because I don't know what it is off the top of my head. Sorry.
That's okay.
So on Twitter, you can find us at writers_Vic. Oh, and on Instagram, we're at Writers Victoria.
Very good. And you're .org.au, I think.
That's right. And so the most information, basically everything you could ever want to know is on our website, writersvictoria.org.au. But we're also on social media. So at writers_Vic on Twitter and at Writers Victoria on Instagram.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
And I did ask only for 2 questions, but this third one's a real quick one. No, for interstate listeners, so people outside of Victoria, are they still able to become a member and enjoy the online features? Or I guess anyone from Australia though, can they join the online presentations and programs?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of the states and territories have their own writer centers as well. So I'd really strongly encourage you to join your local writer center, because then you'll have the access to your local community. But all of the writer centers have an agreement where if you're a writer center of your state or territory, you're able to access member prices and member benefits of the other writer centers. So do join your own writers center, but then please do feel free to come and join our workshop program.
Just
that's
fabulous.
great to know.
Yes. Tas Writers told us that one, and it made a couple of people think about joining Writers Victoria, which they said, I don't know whether it was right. Do you know what you can get? So, so I think that helped persuade them that it really gave them access to so many fabulous programs. Yeah, lovely. Kate, thank you so much. We've been talking with Kate Cuthbert, who's the Program and Partnership Manager at Writers Vic, and we have made her work very hard. So I'm sure she'll get ready for a really big drink of water or a cup of tea. Good luck with the program, the next program of works that comes out at the end of May. I'm sure that I'll see you at a workshop or 6 sometime in the next future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. You're an absolute superstar, and all the very best moving forward with all those fantastic programs you've got going there in Melbourne.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
And bye for now.
Let's meet again, where magic happens.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.